First of all, let me demonstrate what we're going to be building. We want to generate dummy data for vulnerability analysis. So I want to get data for plugin ID, plugin name, severity, IP address, and first discovered date. Now on the screen, I've already generated the plugin IDs. I randomly generated this using an Excel function. I'll show you that later. I have in total over 2,000 of these. Now I need to fill in the other data. The reason why I want to use an Excel macro, Excel VBA, instead of filling it in directly on the sheet is because there's certain rules I have to follow, which would make this take really a long time to complete. For example, let me just look at one of the plugins. So let's say I'm looking at plugin 945200. Well, all the names for 945200 should be the same, and all the severities should be the same. All right, the IP addresses don't have to be the same, first discovered date don't have to be the same. So that means I have to go through the entire sheet, the entire 2,000, and make sure that every time I see a plugin ID, I give it the same name and same severity. And keep in mind, there's quite a few different plugin IDs over here. So this is going to take me a very long time. So this is a scenario where I'm going to use Microsoft VBA to automate the process. What I want VBA to do is to go through the entire column A, look for plugin IDs that are the same, give them the same plugin name and the same severity, and then give them a random IP address and first discovered date. And then move on to the next one. Now I've already created this, and I'm going to show you what it's going to look like before we do it ourselves. Okay? So this button you see here, it is connected to my code in the background. So when I push the button, there you go. It randomly generates the dummy data for the vulnerability analysis that we're going to be doing for this project. And let's just look at one of the plugin IDs just to show you it's doing what we think. So for this plugin ID, it gives it the same name, same severity, and random IP addresses and dates. Let's look at another plugin ID. Let's go a little further down. For this plugin ID, same names for all the plugin IDs that are the same severity, random IP addresses, and different dates. Okay, now this is a date, this number here, 44151. We'll get into later what this means, but just for now, just know that this is the date field. Okay? All right, so let's build this. First things first, let's put the headings for the data that we need. We want plugin ID, plugin text, severity, IP address, and first discovered date. Next, I want to generate random data for the plugin ID. And for that, I'm going to use a random number generator. In Microsoft Excel, we have the rand function. The rand command generates a random number between 0 and 1. I can make it a number between 0 and 10 by multiplying it by 10. Then it will generate a random number between 0 and 10. What if I wanted to get randomly generated numbers between 0 and 10 that don't have any decimals? Well, I can just use the int function in front of rand. So I just put an int in front of this. And now it will just keep giving me randomly generated numbers. You see all the ones below? Those are randomly generated numbers between 0 and 10, and no longer showing me all those fractions. Now, I don't have to do this nested functionality in order to get a random number that's between one number and another. There is also a rand between function that you can use. And that's what we're going to use right now. I'm going to do rand between. And notice in Excel, there's kind of a helper that helps you determine what you're trying to type. So I just typed rand and it already showed me rand between, right? So, and then open bracket, and then you have to put the bottom part of your range and the top part of your range. So if you want a random number between 0 and 10, all you have to do is write rand between 0, 10. In my case, I want to do rand between 945,200 to 945,450. I want around 2,000 of these randomly generated numbers. So I'm going to come to the little corner of this cell, and drag it all the way down to as far down as I want. Well, let's go to 2,200. So there you go. So that's the first thing we've done. You can see we have generated a bunch of random numbers. And because we did it in a tight range that is 250 in length, because we did 945,200 and 945,450, the chances are we'll have a lot of duplicates, which is good. I want to have plugin IDs that are duplicated, right? When you use these functions like random number generator, every time you type in Excel, it regenerates the number, right? If I type something else, it regenerates the number. That's not good because I don't want it to keep regenerating the number. I just want to have it be static. So after you create it, the first thing you're going to do is copy and paste this as values only so that the number won't be regenerated again, right? Because you don't want every time you add data here, the number there will change, right? You don't want that. So select column A, go to copy, which is this here, or you can do Control C as it says there. Then come to paste, and you're going to paste values, right? So that means you're going to paste only the values and not the formula. All right? So now if you click on the cell again, you don't see that rand between anymore. It's gone. You just have the values that you created. And now when you type a number here, it's not going to change. So that's the first step. When you have a lot of data, you can always make it easier by adding a filter. That way you can look at specific rows or specific types of data and not have to look at the whole 2,000. It's very simple to add a filter. Just select the row that you want to add the filter to. Then come up to the sort and filter icon, click on it, then click on filter. Now you've added a filter for all your headers, okay? Now these other headers don't have any data, so it's not going to be useful. For this one does. So I can click on it, deselect all, and if I just want to look at one plugin ID, I can click on that one. And there you go. You can see I have all these different plugin IDs, and these are the rows that they're located on. So now we need to start creating our VBA code. You're going to need the developer tab, which you can see over here. Now, if you don't have the developer tab on there, maybe it's not selected in your options. To select it, go to File, go to Options, then click on Customize Ribbon. And inside Customize Ribbon, make sure that this developer box is selected. Sometimes it's not selected, and then you wouldn't see that developer tab. Let's go to View Code. This opens an editor. We first have to declare a function. Every VBA script starts with declaring a function. And the way you declare a function is like this. Sub, you give it a name, and then it ends with end sub. So every time you do a VBA code, this is how you're going to start it. Like I said, I'm not looking to make you a VBA expert, but I'm just making you to know the basic things that you need to do VBA in your day-to-day work. And you're going to be pretty much doing this same thing all the time. You're going to declare a function like this, and then you're probably going to try to manipulate some cells. So let me just do some tests to show you what it looks like to manipulate a cell. You write cells. Row is the first one, then column. So let's say I write cell 4, 4. This means I'm looking at, let's go back to Excel. I'm looking at row 4, which is 1, 2, 3. I'm looking at column 4, which is 1, 2, 3, 4, and row 4 down here. So I'm actually talking to this cell, right? That's what this line means. So let's say I want to put something in there. Maybe I just want to put hello. All right? Let me run this code. Let me go back there. And you see, hello is there. See? Real simple. Okay? So that's the first step. The next thing I want you to learn about is loops. Now, if you're familiar with coding, you already know about loops. If you're not familiar with coding, a loop is as it sounds. It is an action that is repeated over and over again. So right now I've written hello in cell 4, 4. But what if I wanted to write hello in cell 4-5, and hello in cell 4-6, and hello in cell 4-7, and hello in cell 4-8? Well, I would use a loop. I would use a counter, something that will go from one step to the other step to the other step to the other step. And there's many different ways to do a loop, but I'm just going to teach you for loops. So let's give it a for loop. And the syntax for that is for j equals 1, 2, 5. Let me explain what's happening here. I'm saying I want a variable to count upwards from 1 to 5. So I want j to be equal to 1, then I want j to be equal to 2, then I want j to be equal to 3, then I want j to be equal to 4. You get it? So that's how you do a for loop. And then you always have to end a for loop with a next. Okay? So a for loop always ends with a next. So remember, macro starts with a sub, it ends with a sub. A for loop ends with a next. And then with the things that you want to loop, you make sure they're inside, in between the for and the next. If you put this thing down here, it's not going to loop. Okay. Remember, this is row and this is column. So if I want to move up the rows from row 1 to from row 1 to row 4, well, let me start from row 2 to row 6, because I don't want to overwrite my first, I don't want to overwrite the header. Let me show you what I mean. If I start from row 1, I'll overwrite this header IP address. I don't want to do that. So I'm going to say, let's start from row 2. So let's come back to the code. Row is the first, column is the second. So if I just come in here, I replace the 4 with a J. So now what is it going to do? It's going to say, put hello in cells 2, 4. Then go to the next one, which is J equal to 3. Put hello in cells 3, 4. Then go to the next one, which is equal to 4. Put hello in cells 4, 4, which is already there. Go to the next one, which is J is equal to 5. Put hello in cells 5, 4. You get it? So that's it. I'm doing a loop. So let me hit run. Let me go and look at it. And there you go. Hello, 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 hello. So you see, I've used VBA to automate the process of typing hello on multiple rows. And we're going to use these same loops to populate all the data on this spreadsheet. So what do we need to do? Let's talk through it. There are a number of plugin IDs in column A. They range from plugin ID 945,200 all the way up to 945,450. So what the code will do is it will go to the first row. It will look for 945,200. If it sees it there, it will put plugin text vulnerability 1 in column B. If it doesn't see it there, it'll go to the next row. It'll look for 945,200. If it sees it there, it will put vulnerability 1 in column B and then go to the next row. If it doesn't see it there, it'll just go to the next row. And it will keep doing that. Once it gets to the end, which is at row 2,200, it will start again, this time looking for 945,201. And it will do the same thing going through each one. So if you think about that, there are 2 loops I have to do. The first loop is the one that goes through each one, right? Each row. The second loop is the one that increments to the next iteration. So I'm going to start first of all searching for 945,200. That's the first loop. And I'm going to go through the full 2,200 rows looking for 945,200. When I get to the end, the outer loop will increment to 945,201, and it will now search through everything again. Let's do it bit by bit. We don't have to do both loops right away. Let me start with the first one. For j equals, we're going to start from 2, because the first row is a header row, right? All the way up to 2,200. And we're going to introduce an if statement. We use if statements if we want to query various options and outcomes, right? So that's what we would use here. So this is what it looks like. An if statement should have a then after it, right? Remember, I'm just telling you all you need to know. I don't want to get too deep into macros. Every VBA code starts with a sub, and every sub ends with an end sub. If you use a for loop in your command, it should end with a next. If you use an if statement, it should have a then, right? So these are things that you must have if you're using any of these statements. So what I'm saying here is, if cells J1 is equal to 945,200, then I'm going to say then cells J2 should equal to vulnerability 1. Right? Okay. So let's just go over here and see what that should look like. Let's take one example. At J1, I said if cell 2, 1, so the row is 1, column is 2. If cell 2, 1 is equal to 945,200, then in cell J2, which would be this one, put the words vulnerability 1, right? Straightforward. Let's run this code. Okay, so I got an error there, and that's because I forgot to tell you guys one thing. For every if statement, it should end with an end if, okay? So if cells is this, then you put the statement, and then you end the if statement with an end if, okay? All right, let's run it again. This time we ran it ran, so let's go and check. And now you see there's vulnerability 1 showing up in a few different places, anywhere where there's 945,200. Let's go down and see. See there's another one there. See there's another one there, another one there, another one there. So the code is working. It went through the entire column looking for 945,200, and it put the word vulnerability 1 in it. I want to be able to increment vulnerability 1 every time I look for a different plugin ID. So I'm going to use a variable. Instead of using vulnerability 1 in here, I'm going to use a variable. So let's just make a variable and call it number, right? And the first one equals 1, right? And then here, I'll say number, okay? What I'm doing here is I want to use a variable for the number instead of hard coding the word vulnerability 1. That way I can increment it. So before I typed vulnerability 1 here, but now instead what I want to do is vulnerability 1. And I think it should be an and. Yeah, vulnerability 1. And just to show you guys that this is a new thing I'm doing, maybe I should call it vulnerability 99, just so you'll see the difference, okay? So it's going to be the same thing. It's going to look for 945,200, and it will put vulnerability 99 anytime it sees it. So let's run that. Okay, let's go back and look. So you see, now we see vulnerability 99. All right? So we're breaking this code down little by little. We're figuring it out. That's what you do with macros. Okay, let's come back here. So it works. All right, so let me go back, make it 1. All right. So it's going to start at 945,200. But even the 945,200, I want that to also be dynamic. I don't want to hard code this number. I want this number to be changing. So this is where I'm going to introduce the second loop. I want to be able to go from 945,200 and increment by 1 all the way up to 945,450. And I'm going to use a second loop to do this. The first loop I made goes through each row, and the second loop I made goes through each plugin, right? Increments to each plugin. That allows you to check each plugin against each row. So let's come back to the code. We'll use another loop. So that's what I have here. For I equals 945,200 all the way up to 945,450. Then you do the internal loop. And this I is just a variable. It could be anything. It could be X, it could be Y, it could be boy, it could be girl. The only thing we need to know is that the variable I is being incremented. So I is equal to 945,200. I is equal to 945,201. Same thing as J, right? So now instead of hard coding 945,200 here, I can just replace it with I. That way, whenever I increments, this one increments too. So during the first loop, this one will be all 945,200, and then it will increment as this one increments, right? All right. So I also want to get number to increment. Well, first of all, what do I do when I have a for loop? I close it out with the next, okay? So this next is for this for loop, and this next is for this for loop. Okay. So this number, I'll do vulnerability 1 for every plugin that I find out that is 945,200. But when I increment to 945,201, whenever I find that, I want to be giving it vulnerability 2, not 1. And then the next one, I want to give vulnerability 3, and so on and so forth. So that means once the loop ends, once this internal loop ends, I want to increase the number from 1 to 2. And the way to do that is you just add a little counter here. You do number equals number plus 1. Right? That's all you do. So when it starts off, it's 1. And when it comes down here, it's 1 plus 1 is 2. So now number is 2. So when this loop starts again, it will say vulnerability 2. And then when the loop finishes, it'll come here and it will say 2 plus 1 is 3. And then when this loop starts again, it'll be vulnerability 3. Get it? So let's run this test, see what happens. All right. And now we've fully populated everything, right? With all the different numbers, vulnerability 149, vulnerability 151, and each one should have the unique number. So you see this one is all vulnerability 1s. This one is all vulnerability 6s. There we go. So we've used VBA to create dummy data for the plugin text. Now let's do the remaining columns.